we take you to the Far East and to Europe to hear correspondents around the world.
But before we hear from our correspondents around the world, here is an announcement. Can you split a penny 3 ways? Well, you could, perhaps, but it would be easier to split $1 or $5 3 ways, especially when the money that's split 3 ways goes to our allies, our armed forces, and our neighbors. Now, that's the job of the National War Fund, to see that every dollar contributed to it is doing a 3-way job. The end of the war does not mean the end of the National War Fund's needs. On the contrary, the need is fully as high during the days of homecoming and reconversion. As President Truman pointed out, we have won the military fight, but are virtually just beginning the fight on famine, pestilence, and general distress. Help the National War Fund. And now, correspondents around the world.
This is Creighton Scott in New York. Attorneys of Pierre Laval, premier under the Vichy regime, claim that they have discovered evidence that will acquit him of treason charges. 50 B-29s have delivered relief supplies to Americans on Okinawa, which was yesterday devastated by a typhoon. And striking dock workers have virtually paralyzed shipping in the world's 2 largest harbors, New York and London. Those are highlights. For details, we take you to the Far East by way of the Pacific Coast.
Yet it is impossible to separate Hirohito as an individual from Hirohito as a symbol of militarism. We are against both of Shiga Sobi. And the communists have not yet decided a fitting fate for the Empress and the imperial children.
Ladies and gentlemen, we regret that due to atmospheric conditions, we are unable to bring you a report from ABC correspondent Frederick Hopper in Tokyo. We return you now to Creighton Scott in New York.
The next stage of our journey takes us across the Atlantic to Europe. This report comes to you from Madrid.
This is Alvin West in Madrid. Bread may soon replace politics as the #1 topic of conversation in the numerous cafes of Spain's cities and towns. One of the worst droughts in the country's history has seared the grain-growing areas and dried up rivers and streams, all important to hydroelectric power production. The best available information indicates a wheat crop of approximately 1,800,000 tons, compared with normal requirements of about 3.5 million tons. Already, the government-controlled Spanish press is predicting a hard winter. One Madrid newspaper says the humble and middle classes will suffer. The same newspaper also forecasts a crisis in railway transportation if Providence does not intervene and rains come. Lack of water has reduced hydroelectric power production. Coal, which normally goes to railroads and other industries, has been diverted to power-producing plants. The Spaniards are feeling the pinch now in many ways. Cafes, nightclubs, and movies must close earlier than usual. In this capital of more than 1 million persons, water is available in the homes only 8 hours a day. Likewise, there is electricity for lights, refrigerators, and elevators only between 7:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., and during afternoons on alternate days. A recent decree requires homes and business houses to reduce their consumption of electric current by 25%. Those who fail to comply must pay 5%, or about 55 cents for each kilowatt used in excess of their quota. This is Alvin West speaking. I return you now to the American Broadcasting Company in New York.
This is Creighton Scott in New York. Already within a single lifetime, 2 world wars have started in Central Europe. And many of those who saw the beginning of the First and Second World Wars may live to see the beginning of a third. Whether these people will also live to see the end of it is another matter. But with atomic bombs and the like, life won't be any too secure in the Third World War. Anyway, because Middle Europe proved such a tinderbox in the past, our State Department is bound to be concerned about it in the future. And with the state of affairs what it is in Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Poland, a further complication, this time in Yugoslavia, ought to cause some furrowed brows in Washington and London. Dr. Ivan Subasic, Yugoslav foreign minister, has resigned, having been preceded in this act by Dr. Juraj Sute. Both men, but especially Dr. Subasic, made a specialty of compromise. Dr. Subasic was the only man that could be found in Yugoslavia who could engineer a reconciliation between the old monarchist government of King Peter and the communist government of Marshal Tito. And he was responsible for setting up the three-man regency that was recognized by the other allies. According to the best sources, Dr. Subasic resigned for a great number of reasons. One was the way in which the general election, set for November the 11th, was being rigged by Tito's party so that none but Tito's candidates would have more than a fair chance. Another reason was the fact that Parliament had been prevented from meeting for 3 solid months. Still another was the practice of condemning members of rival political parties, many of them decidedly Democratic, to death without trial or appeal. There were also other causes of friction, such as the disclosure that about 100,000 members of the Yugoslav Peasant Party, a Democratic group, were being kept in concentration camps, camps the existence of which had never been made public by the government. And also the fact that Dr. Subasic himself did not go to London during the Council of Foreign Ministers, ostensibly because he was ill from a paralytic stroke, but actually because he was a prisoner in his own home, surrounded by heavily armed guards who even refused to allow the American ambassador to call and express his hopes for the doctor's recovery. In short, it's pretty plain that Marshal Tito has wearied of compromise, moderation, and reconciliation, and hence has decided that he no longer has any use for Subasic and his followers. This is something to worry about. It's tantamount to a declaration from Belgrade to the effect that Yugoslavia intends to go its own way without worrying about the approval or disapproval of the great powers. It's also presumably Marshal Tito's reaction to the fact that his claim to the Italian territory around Trieste was blocked by the United States and Great Britain in London. The upshot may be that London and Washington will refuse to recognize the new Yugoslav government, which means more tension and more diplomatic worry for everybody. The most ghastly story of gangsterism in all history will be handed up to an international four-power court in Berlin next week, probably on Monday. It's a story with which we're all familiar by now, the chapters of which have been told on our newscasts since 1933, when that former Austrian paperhanger came up out of the sewers of Munich to launch his career of crime. It's the story of Nazism, the indictment against the fallen hierarchy of the Hitler regime. The 20,000-word document will be used as the basis of the war crimes trials at Nuremberg this winter of 24 top-ranking Nazis. Collectively, the massive indictment charges the Nazi kingpins with a vast conspiracy against humanity in which Hitlerism imposed its will on the German people as the first move towards the planned slaughter of the rest of the world. All the horrible crimes of Nazism, the wanton murder of millions in torture camps, the sinking of neutral vessels, the bombing of helpless cities, and the slaying of disarmed persons and prisoners of war, all are listed in the most exhaustive detail. A German general who ordered the murder of 15 captured Americans must pay with his own life for this particular crime. A 5-man American military court has convicted and sentenced to death General Anton Dostler. He is the first Nazi general to be tried in Western Europe as a war criminal. The verdict was announced shortly after 9 a.m., that is to say 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Major General Lawrence Janes, the president of the Military Commission, pronounced the sentence, directing that the German general be shot to death by musket, a rather antiquated phrase which just simply means being shot. The sentence must be reviewed by the Allied commander in the Mediterranean theater. If upheld, the condemned German general probably will be executed at the Aversa detention camp. Dostler stood at attention as the sentence was pronounced, and General Janes paused every few seconds so that his words could be translated to the defendant, who spoke no English. Dostler was told that at least 3/5 of the court had agreed on his guilt, and that the death sentence was voted by secret ballot. His defense was that he'd acted under a blanket order from Adolf Hitler that all Allied commandos were to be executed, and he contended that he'd consulted his superiors before the Americans were shot. The Argentine crisis continues this morning unabated. Juan Perón is out, but the powerful military club, an organization of Army and Navy officers, says that more heads must fall before the shouting is over. Buenos Aires dispatches tell us that 700 officers in the military club have demanded from President Farrell the dismissal of his entire cabinet. But that's not all. Reliable sources disclose that a second group of officers, members of the formidable Campo de Mayo garrison, now are storming the government with demands, including a call for early elections. The government already has announced that elections will be held on April the 7th. The demands of the Campo de Mayo garrison reportedly are as follows: resignation of the entire Farrell government, lifting of the state of siege, the arrest of Juan Perón, who is now campaigning for his election in the presidency, and finally, elections within 90 days, presumably without Perón. The report says that the military club is trying to coordinate its activities with the Campo de Mayo garrison group. And so the story goes, while political observers ponder whether real democratization, it's a tough word, can be tried in Argentina at any time. And that's a part of this morning's news. There'll be more news in just a moment after a word from your announcer.
Although the war has ended, there still are many war needs to be met. And one of those urgent needs is for experienced seamen. If you've ever sailed on salt water, won't you lend a hand to Uncle Sam's Merchant Marine by signing up as an AB or officer? A great and important task falls upon America's Merchant Marine during these post-war days, an assignment that calls for the help of every experienced seaman and officer now working ashore. You're needed to sail the supply ships to our servicemen and women still stationed all over the world, to transport replacement troops, to bring the wounded and ill home. As world shipping moves into the peace, the U.S. Merchant Marine urges all of you who've sailed as ABs or officers to sign up for a ship assignment once again. Standby pay begins when you're accepted. Upgrading is rapid, so contact your local U.S. employment office or wire collect to Merchant Marine, Washington 25, D.C. Now back to Creighton Scott.
This being Columbus Day, the anniversary of the day on which America was discovered, it's worth reminding a nation with an increasingly isolationist Congress that Christopher Columbus was not an American by birth and that there is not a single citizen of the United States whose antecedents do not lie in the Old World, unless he happens to be a full-blooded Indian. If the people of the Old World are as revolting as many of our national legislators seem to think, then all of us, excepting the full-blooded Indians, ought to cut our throats, having come from such polluted stock. In and around Washington these days, you hear all sorts of strange remarks, such as that the Germans are the most attractive people in Europe, a view which is apparently based on the fact that the Germans are not so thin and starved-looking as the rest and are better clothed than the rest of Europe. The reason for this, it's hardly worth remarking, is that the Germans were the most unscrupulous thieves in history. Many a congressman has come home having spent a few hours in each of several countries and given it as his opinion that this generation and most future generations abroad are not worth saving. And the natural upshot is a bitterness which is being very freely expressed by the press abroad. For example, the official Russian newspaper Izvestia comes out and accuses this country of attempting to force Britain and other countries into a state of economic vassalage. That's one interpretation of our actions. Others are that we're just plain selfish and that having criticized colonial empires for decades, we are now planning to set out building an empire of our own. Under the circumstances, it's worth remembering that Columbus, a very enterprising man, was an Italian by birth and that Spain financed his discoveries, and that the fact that we were slow to fight Hitler and hence suffered less than other nations is nothing to brag about. This is Creighton Scott speaking. You've heard a fragmentary report from Tokyo, from Madrid by transcription, and from myself in New York. Now, back to your announcer.
On Halloween 1938, the startled citizens of New Jersey turned on their radio and heard that a group of men from Mars were invading. The man responsible for the real-sounding script was Orson Welles. Things have never been very dull when he's around, and that's why we think you'll enjoy hearing him on Sunday over most of these stations. Listen again Monday when you will again hear Correspondents Around the World. This is the American Broadcasting